Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the launch of Language Trends Northern Ireland Research. My name is Jonathan Stewart and I'm the Director of the British Council in Northern Ireland who commissioned the research. The British Council is the UK's organisation for international education and cultural relations, and we build connections, understanding and trust between people in the UK and other countries through arts and culture, English language and education. Advocating for language learning in UK schools and the provision of resources, activities and programmes supporting language teaching is an important part of our work in education. We believe that languages play a vital role in giving young people the skills, intercultural understanding and confidence to support future employment and prosperity in an increasingly international world, while enriching their lives through the enjoyment of learning languages themselves. I'm really pleased to be attending today's launch of Language Trends Northern Ireland Research, which will give an overview of the current situation for language learning in Northern Ireland schools during what has been an extremely difficult and challenging year for teachers and pupils alike. I look forward to hearing from some of our teachers and pupils later on in the session. The research which we will be referring to today is available on our British Council Northern Ireland website, along with the previous research which we carried out 2 years ago in 2019. Before we start, I'd like to thank Dr. Ian Collen, Director of NICILT at Queen's University Belfast, who carried out the research and wrote this year's report. Thanks also to Janice Carruthers, Professor of French Linguistics at Queen's University Belfast, who is today's chair. And thanks to all of our panelists for giving up their time to be here, and Janice will introduce us to them shortly. Thanks also go to our steering group, who were instrumental in providing guidance and helping us to frame this year's survey questions. Finally, thanks to all of the teachers and pupils across Northern Ireland who responded to the survey questions and also took part in the various focus groups. Some housekeeping before we start. Today we're going to record the session and a video of this will be available on the British Council Northern Ireland website in the coming days. For those of you who are using social media, we have a hashtag for today, and that's Language Trends NI, and we'll post a link to the research on the Twitter account, as well as the British Council's Instagram, Facebook and website platforms. Using Teams Live closed caption system, we will have subtitles available today, so you can follow the sessions, and these will be available in English, Arabic, French, Spanish, Italian, German and Portuguese. This is computer generated, so apologies in advance if there are any translation mistakes. We also have British and Irish Sign Language interpreters, and those links should already have been sent to anybody who requested them in advance. But again, recordings of these will also be available in the coming days on our website. So finally, we want today to be as interactive as possible. So we would encourage you to use the Q&A function on Teams Live and post your questions or comments. If it's to a specific panelist, make that clear. And we'll try to get through as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. So now I'd like to hand over to Dr. Ian Collen, who carried out this year's research. And Ian's going to present us with some of the highlights from the research, and following that, then we will have a short, we'll have a panel discussion and a short, quick Q&A session at the end. So thank you very much, and over to Ian to present the main findings.
Bonjour, guten tag, hola, dia dich. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ian Collen and I was the lead researcher on the Language Trends research this year, and I very much look forward to presenting our findings to you today. On your screen, you should now be able to see a slide with details about what we did in our research, and I do hope that that's being shared with you. We started off by looking at trends in GCSE language entries over time, over the past 25 years. And what you can see in this graph is the 4 main curricular languages in Northern Ireland of French, German, Irish and Spanish. So along here, you should be able to see the graph of the main curricular languages that are taught in Northern Ireland. And we have got on the blue line French, on the yellow line Spanish, on the green line Irish, and on the orange line at the very bottom we have German. As a researcher, I looked at the trends in entry over the past 25 years for GCSE because this is most reflective of what is going on in our schools at Key Stage 3 and at GCSE level. We can conclude from this graph that the main issue is being the decline of French over time, that has gone down from over 14,000 entries in 1996 to just under 4,000 entries in 2020. Similarly, we can also see that Spanish has grown from a relatively small base, and it is important to contextualise the growth in Spanish against this small base. Numbers for Irish have declined over time, and that is still a decline even with fluctuations in pupil numbers, and numbers in German have also declined over time. So it was against this backdrop of an overall decline in modern languages at GCSE since 1995 that we set about looking at our research for what is currently happening in Northern Ireland in 2021. If we move on to the next slide, we will be able to see what we are looking at within our research. We did 3 different surveys, one with Year 9 pupils, 2 teacher surveys, and 3 pupil focus groups. Within our Year 9 pupil survey, we had over 1,500 responses from pupils in 38 different schools. It's important to say that all of the pupils were at home whenever they were completing this survey as part of the COVID-19 lockdown, and the pupils voluntarily chose to respond to the survey link that was shared by their teacher. In the 2 teacher surveys, we sent these out to head teachers in all primary schools in Northern Ireland and to all heads of department in post-primary schools in Northern Ireland. We had a response rate of 15.3% from our primary survey, and that may seem relatively low in comparison to the post-primary, but it is in line with the survey response rate that colleagues at Stramillis University College got in their review of primary languages back in 2016. In terms of our post-primary review, it was a very healthy figure of teachers who were coming back to us, and that means we've got a very strong basket of evidence of what's happening in post-primary. And then in our 3 pupil focus groups, we had 17 pupils across 3 different schools. And the purpose of the pupil focus groups was to try and tease out some of the main findings of the large scale pupil survey. And I'm delighted that some of the pupils who have contributed to the survey will be with us later on this afternoon. If we move on then to the next slide. We can see that why did we choose to study Year 9 pupils? Well, the reason for this is young people are experts in their own lives, and this was no way a children's rights-based approach to research, but we did feel it was very important to put young people at the heart of what we were looking to study. For Year 9 pupils in Northern Ireland, anybody who's joining us from England, Year 9 in Northern Ireland is the same as Year 8 in England. So these pupils are in their 2nd year of statutory language learning on the Northern Ireland curriculum. And it is the year group that was disrupted the most by COVID-19 during the past 2 school years. So we really wanted to get to the crux of what these young people have experienced over the past 2 years and what the impact of the pandemic has been on their language learning journey. Year 9 pupils are also considering their future career options whenever they move into Year 10 around whether to take a GCSE language or not. And we wanted to find out what young people's perceptions were of continuing with languages to GCSE. Also important to note that Janice Carruthers and Leanne Henderson at Queen's are both working on a large-scale cross-sectional survey of Year 10 pupils, Year 12 pupils and Year 14 pupils in relation to language learning. So that's what we did, and what did we find out? Let's see on the next slide what we found out about primary. So the biggest shock from primary was that just 15% of responding schools were teaching a language, and this is down from 55% when we last asked this question back in 2019. It might not be a shock whenever I tell you that it was largely due to the coronavirus pandemic, But what we've found here in Northern Ireland, in comparison to when we do this survey in England or in other jurisdictions, is that the fact that languages are not compulsory on the primary curriculum has made the problem even worse, in a sense that languages have been the first thing to go because they're seen as the thing that is nice to do in primary school, either as an after-school activity or as part of class time, and it wasn't deemed to be important enough to continue teaching. And who can blame teachers given the fact that it's not a statutory part of the curriculum? We find out that even under normal circumstances, 68% of primary schools report that there are no opportunities for their pupils or indeed staff for international engagement, no contacts with schools in other countries, and no opportunities to get involved in international opportunities to connect young people across borders. In the 4 out of 10 primary schools which usually teach language, it will be the class teacher who is the main person delivering the teaching. But when we talk to schools that don't currently deliver primary languages, lack of funding was cited as the main reason why primary schools do not currently teach languages. There's great appetite amongst lots of primary principals for languages. In fact, 70% of them were telling us that they thought languages should be on the primary curriculum. On to the next slide then. We teased this out with our Year 9 pupils in our large-scale survey. And we asked them to think back to their own primary experience of learning a language. Compared to the school principals in primary, who the overwhelming majority were telling us that languages should be compulsory at primary, the Year 9 pupils were telling us that it shouldn't be compulsory at primary, but that pupils should definitely have the option to learn a language if they want to in primary level. So we thought that was a very interesting finding, but definitely lots of appetite there for primary languages. If we move on then to the next slide, we can come on to the main findings that we've found from our post-primary schools. The biggest division we can see here is between grammar and non-grammar or secondary schools. So Northern Ireland has quite a complex system of school management, and we have attributed schools to either being one of the 66 grammar schools or one of the secondary schools. What we can see here is a huge divide between the amount of curriculum time for languages at Key Stage 3 between grammar and secondary or non-grammar schools. In grammar schools, the tendency is for pupils to have, in the main, more than 2 hours of language learning per week. In secondary schools, the tendency is for pupils to have less than 2 hours of language learning per week. There are, of course, anomalies, and there are some schools in the secondary sector that are doing a really good job of teaching 3 to 4 hours per week, for example. But what we can see in the bulk of the data is this huge divide between grammar and secondary schools. This finding was also in research that was conducted by Henderson and Carruthers, looking at a 2018 data set of language uptake in post-primary schools, and there's great inequities across the system. If we move on to our next slide, we can see that whenever we talk to our Year 9 pupils, 54% of Year 9 pupils said that they find languages harder to learn online compared to their other subjects. Just 44% of the Year 9 pupils told us that they plan to do a language for GCSE. And when we probed around the position of languages in a future career, an overwhelming majority of pupils, 92%, cannot see the relevance of languages for their own future career, and many of them do plan to stop at GCSE even if they do go on to take a GCSE. Just 1 in 10 said they would consider taking a language for A-level. So from this we can conclude that there is work to be done in careers education, information, advice and guidance in schools so that young people can see the value of languages for their future self. If we move on to the next slide then, we can look particularly at Key Stage 4, which is years 11 and 12 in Northern Ireland, ages 14 to 16. Up until 2004, languages were a compulsory GCSE subject for young people, and today in 2021, just 8% of our responding schools have got a compulsory GCSE language provision. And that is in the spirit of the current Northern Ireland curriculum, where there is a great deal of flexibility, but as we know, with this flexibility also comes a degree of risk. We saw particularly last year, because of the pandemic, that there was a decrease in availability of qualifications in heritage or home languages for pupils, and that really is very regrettable because of the pandemic. But we also saw the grammar secondary divide being very, very stark at Key Stage 4, with 4 responding secondary or non-grammar schools telling us that they're not running any Year 11 provision in modern languages. And that's really, really sad. I think that there are children attending schools where they cannot do a GCSE in a modern language. If we move on to our next slide, then we will take a look at post-16 and our main findings there. What we saw at GCSE between grammar and non-grammar schools is even more marked in the post-16 category. In most secondary schools, where languages do run at A level, the vast majority of classes will have less than 5 pupils, and that puts these schools on a very unstable financial footing. In both grammar and secondary schools, 43% of our responding schools told us that A level classes will not run in modern languages if there are not enough pupils. Some schools are operating in area learning communities where schools cooperate together to deliver post-14 and post-16 provision. But even within area learning communities, we have evidence that some modern languages classes didn't work or didn't operate because there weren't enough pupils. What is enough pupils? Well, the number changes from school to school. Some schools tell us it's around 5 pupils for an A-level class to run. Other schools tell us a minimum of 8 up to a minimum of 12 pupils. We can also see that there is a growing trend for composite A-level classes where Year 13 and Year 14 pupils, or AS and A2 pupils, are taught together at the same time with the same teacher. This is a relatively new phenomenon, and it's one that schools are going down to try and get modern languages to continue at A level. But the linguist in me says that language learning is a very linear thing or area of study to do, and we need to do more research into composite classes at A level to see if they are a good thing, a bad thing, or if there's no impact on pupils' progress. So that brings me to my final slide, which is to ask, what do I think, as the lead researcher of this piece of research, needs to be done to try and stem the decline in language learning? I will say very clearly, I think we have enough evidence of what is going on within our school system, and we also have a growing amount of evidence of what needs to be done to effect change. Back in 2020, the British Academy, along with the British Council and a number of other organisations, called for a national strategy for languages. And contained within that strategy is a number of key things that can be done in Northern Ireland, and they've been costed, that can try and reverse the decline in language learning. At post-16, we should have a languages premium where there is a financial incentive either for pupils or for schools to continue with language study beyond age 16. Also, from my own research, I think that we need to look very carefully at what young people are learning for GCSE and Key Stage 3. We know that teachers are working very hard in their individual classrooms, but what we are teaching in GCSE modern languages hasn't really changed for the past 40 years, nor has the mode of assessment. For example, young people in GCSEs for modern languages are put into an assembly hall and are asked to listen to a CD track of pre-recorded French or pre-recorded Irish or whatever language is under study, and then to answer questions on that. This is probably one of the first times that these young people have ever seen a CD. They are living in a very different world to what we were living in 40 years ago. So with that, I would say that there is an urgent need to reform the Northern Ireland curriculum for modern languages. These conversations are well underway in England. They haven't proved to be popular, but at least the conversations are underway. If we continue to keep doing what we have been doing for the past 40 years, then nothing's going to change. We need modern languages to appeal to a broad range of young people. And we know from our research that the biggest barriers to taking a language for GCSE are first and foremost the nature and content of external exams, and secondly, the way external exams are marked and graded. We need to get this right for all our young people, and we can do better in terms of how we assess GCSE languages. The traditional speaking exam of a pupil in a room and it being pre-recorded and talking to their teacher is no longer going to cut the mustard with the young people of today, nor is the CD player in the assembly hall with pre-recorded language that pupils hear twice. We've got to think of more creative ways to assess our young people in languages, and we've got to make sure that they're being rewarded fairly for the work that they're putting into language learning. It's on that note that I'm going to hand over to our chair for today, Professor Janice Carruthers, who will take a number of themes from the report and discuss them with our very interesting panel members of in-service teachers and pupils from local schools. Over to Janice.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian, and thanks to all of you for coming along this afternoon. As you know, the event's hosted by the British Council in Northern Ireland. I'm Janice Carruthers. I'm Professor of French Linguistics at Queen's, but also Modern Languages Leadership Fellow with the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So thanks to Ian for taking us through the highlights of this year's research. It's given us plenty to think about and plenty to talk about this afternoon. I'd like to introduce our fantastic panel of young people and school leaders joining us today. So we have Kevin Donaghy, Principal of St Ronan's Primary School in Newry, Ciara McCoy, Head of Irish at St Paul's High School in Bessbrook, and they're going to bring us the primary and post-primary pictures from a teacher perspective. And we also have 2 Year 9 pupils joining us. We have Lucy from Banbridge Academy and Jude from St Malachy's in Castlewellan. So we're very grateful to all of you for giving up your time this afternoon. So the research was carried out then by Dr. Ian Collen from NICILT, and 2021 is the 2nd edition of Language Trends Northern Ireland, where the inaugural report was published back in 2019. As Jonathan mentioned, please do join in today's conversation by commenting and asking questions, posting on social media on #LanguageTrendsNI. So we're going to start then by asking our panelists some questions to introduce the topic, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from our live audience. So don't forget to post yours in the Q&A. We won't publish repeated questions and comments, so if you see a post or a question that you like or an issue that you want to raise, please do use the thumbs up button, and that will help us to identify the popular themes and questions. Okay, so Kevin, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to you first. As principal of a primary school then, how would you describe the teaching of languages in primary in Northern Ireland as things currently stand?
Good afternoon, Janice. Well, as a primary school leader, in a couple of words, chaotic, underfunded. You know, schools are trying their very best with a very limited amount of resource to promote languages. And like I have seen myself how children love learning languages. Under the modern language programme that we had, it was done through games, songs, rhymes, and the children have thoroughly enjoyed it. We haven't actually had any language learning because of COVID in our class bubbles. And the one question the children are actually asking me is, when can we actually go back and start learning Spanish again? Because we had Spanish as our main language. Children really enjoyed it. And you know, all the evidence says about having a language learning as completely immersive and starting in the early years, which the language learning programme did, and we funded it ourselves in the upper end of the school. But again, this funding was withdrawn for purely financial reasons by the Department of Education, and there was no evidence to suggest that the programme that was in place was actually not working. So again, it's something that I know that our children really miss.
Thanks, Kevin. So the question of funding in primary school is obviously absolutely key. You've also mentioned the impact of COVID there as well, and that's something we'll come back to. Can I ask Ciara, in the post-primary sector, have you seen any major shifts in trends in post-primary languages in recent years, and what might be the reasons behind that?
Yes, thank you, Janice. Similar to what Ian has illustrated there in the report, we've definitely seen a decline in the uptake of languages at both GCSE and A-level. There are several reasons for this that contribute to it. There definitely is a perception out there that languages are much more difficult at GCSE and A-level than other subjects, and that they're graded much more harshly as well. There's a lack of awareness by both maybe pupils and parents of what skills are developed by studying a language and what careers are available through languages. So I think we need a great push with that. We have witnessed the impact of COVID as well on our numbers at GCSE and A-level. Despite the fact that I believe languages teachers are very highly skilled in IT and often use it in their teaching, it just didn't seem to translate that well during lockdown. I think students missed the opportunity to communicate in the target language with their teacher or with their peers, and that has had an impact on our numbers at GCSE. They've also missed the opportunity of spending time in a target language region. And often that can be a big draw at GCSE. You have the chance to head to the Gaeltacht or head off to Spain as part of your studies, and that has had an impact as well. It would also be remiss of me not to mention the fact that SEA have withdrawn the oral exam this year and last year. And I don't think that sends out a very positive message about languages. Speaking the language is what makes it different from every other subject. You know, it's not focusing on writing or textbooks. It's a really lively subject to teach. And I would worry about the impact that would have on numbers in the future as well.
That's very helpful, Ciara. And so in other words, there are multiple factors at work here around grading difficulty and issues that have been exacerbated by COVID, and take your point entirely there. It's a very important point around the oral being the element that has been that is suggested for omission. Talking about COVID and the issues that have arisen there, Lucy, as a pupil who's been learning languages, has COVID-19 affected how you've learnt languages? Has it made it easier? Has it made it harder? How has it changed things for you, Lucy, as a language learner?
Well, unfortunately, I feel as though languages has become more difficult with COVID-19. There weren't many listening exercises over lockdown, and I strongly believe that it was the easiest way to learn a language. This was probably due to lack of devices in some people's homes.
So you think there's maybe been a bit of a divide there between those who have access to some of the technology, which is a wider problem that has happened with COVID as well. How did you find it with the oral work, for example, doing the oral work online? Did you find that tricky?
Well, oral exercises are very useful, and if a pupil says a sentence out loud, then it helps them to remember it more, I think, anyway. Great,
thank you. And could I just ask Jude a question then, again, as a language learner. The research in language trends this year suggested that only around 1 in 10 pupils learning languages thought that languages would be relevant for their future career. Would you agree with that? And if that's the case, why do you think pupils feel like that?
I don't think that there won't be opportunities, but I actually can understand why pupils feel this way. I feel a lot of language learners aren't shown the opportunities that they'll have in the future with their jobs in school when learning languages. I think that some of the opportunities are things like being able to have, like, depending on what your job you want, being able to have clients through English or whatever language you're learning, and being able to help, like, facilitate resources in your job for people wanting to learn languages there as well.
That's great. So you think some of what needs to be done is learning a bit more about the ways in which languages might be involved in all sorts of jobs and not just the obvious ones that might seem to have languages. That's great. Ian, could I bring you back in here? We've talked quite a bit about oral work of various sorts and the importance of being able to speak the language. The report mentions the important role of language assistants in schools. Could you say a little bit more about why their role is so crucial?
Yes, thank you, Janice. So in the report, we found that language assistants are reasonably healthy in our schools in terms of numbers, but there has been a marked decline over the past 10 years. And the reasons why there has been a decline are purely financial reasons. It is not because school leaders and heads of modern languages do not see the value in having a language assistant in school, but it really is a financial budgetary issue. Language assistants, as hopefully people know, are often young people who are training to become teachers in France, Germany, Spain, or native speakers from the Gaeltacht, or indeed other countries, who come to Northern Ireland to work in our schools as a teacher's assistant, with their main focus being to help young people with their spoken language and with their pronunciation. And they're incredibly important because they not only bring with them the skills of being a native speaker, which with the best will in the world, none of us who speak languages from Northern Ireland are able to replicate fully, particularly those countries out with the island of Ireland. They also bring with them a great deal of cultural insight that really enriches the fabric of school life. And we do have a very rich melting pot here in Northern Ireland of different languages, but there are some schools and pockets of Northern Ireland where there are no languages spoken amongst the pupil or staff body other than English. So to have a language assistant, particularly in those schools, is really a very enriching experience to find out about other cultures and how things operate in other countries. So I think that all of that means that language assistants are a very important and a very valuable resource. And as we have spoken about also today around CCA's decision to discontinue the units in speaking at GCSE, AS and A level for the summer 2022 awarding series is the most regrettable step I think I have ever heard in language learning in Northern Ireland. And as a linguist, I would be questioning who approved this decision, because it really is a decision that has been very poorly thought through. The language assistant goes hand in hand with GCSE speaking and with AS and A2 speaking. Their role is crucial for all of that. And the latest decision around speaking with examinations has been very, very regrettable. So I certainly hope that language assistants will continue for a long time. They make a really important contribution to our school system, and they could also make a very important contribution to our primary schools if we ever could get our policy right and ensure that languages are a statutory part of the primary curriculum in Northern Ireland. And I can just imagine the transformative impact that this could have on all primary schools here.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian, and I think we would all concur with the view that removing the oral component rather than something else is not a healthy decision for the future of languages. I think the sector is agreed on that. Kevin, if I can come back to you, what do you feel that organisations such as the British Council and other bodies who can influence debate around languages could do to support and encourage language teaching and learning in Northern Ireland?
Okay, St Ronan's is actually in a shared education partnership with Bridge Integrated in Banbridge. And what we have been able to do is actually work with the British Council on initiatives such as Erasmus+, and we were part of an Erasmus+ programme, working with colleagues in Italy, in Poland, in Spain, and the teachers there had the opportunity to come to visit us here in Northern Ireland, and we had the opportunity to actually go to Spain. Unfortunately, we were due to go to Italy whenever lockdown hit, and we didn't get the opportunity to continue our programme. So we had a lot of support from the British Council actually putting together the Erasmus+ programme and the application. We're also part of a Global Schools programme, and again it's a shared partnership between ourselves and our colleagues in Bridge. And a couple of our teachers actually had the opportunity to travel to Africa to actually experience education there. And again, that was funded through the British Council's Global Education Programme. So we have had a great opportunity to work with the British Council. Unfortunately, Brexit has impacted on the decision to withdraw from Erasmus+, and I think that is significant and very sad. But what I do have to say as well, we look at languages just in the purely spoken languages, but we also have to think of our colleagues in the deaf community, and in terms of incorporating sign language possibly into a curriculum. Now again, I think it's important that that curriculum is widely consulted on, and I think primary educational school leaders, teachers need to be listened to, before we actually put together a modern foreign language programme for actually primary schools.
That's great, Kevin. Thank you very much indeed. And I think, again, we would all concur on the question around Erasmus and the need for us to find mechanisms for our students to go abroad and for students from other countries to come to us, especially in the light of everything Ian was talking about there for the role of language assistance. Ciara, thinking of St Paul's and your role in St Paul's, what sorts of initiatives have you taken at school level to help to promote languages amongst the pupils?
Well, I think we're very fortunate in St Paul's that our numbers in all 3 languages are still very strong. But we do understand that we can't rest on our laurels, and we need to be constantly reviewing how we're teaching, how we're delivering our subjects, and if we're meeting all the needs of all the learners in our school. There's a number of things that I think impact on our numbers being quite strong. First of all, strategically, languages are quite visible within the school. Our principal and 2 of our vice principals are all former Irish and French teachers. They're all linguists, which helps a lot. Even at a basic level, we have a lovely set of stairs between maths and Irish, where we have all the numbers in English, Irish, Spanish and French visible on the stairs for the students. We've been recruiting quite aggressively over the last 5 years in all languages, and we love recruiting newly qualified teachers as well, because we find that it just reinvigorates our languages departments. It keeps us up to speed with all new research with regard to languages teaching. And we've great relationships with the likes of British Council, Queen's, NICILT, Galen, and we try to really participate in any events that are ongoing for languages. But I think the biggest impact really is the fact that we allow our year 8s to try Irish, Spanish and French and have taster sessions in year 8. And then they make their choices at the end of year 8 of what they'd like to study in year 9 and year 10. So it means the decision on languages isn't being decided by their parents, by what maybe the parents preferred when they were younger, but they're getting a good experience of all 3 languages and then picking which they would like to continue studying. And this means they have a wee bit of ownership on their language journey. Apathy hasn't completely set in at the end of year 10, but also as teachers, it puts us under a wee bit of pressure because the students are and will vote with their feet at the end of year 8, year 10 and year 12. So it puts us under pressure to make sure that all our lessons are good and that we're up to date and appealing to the students and making languages attractive to them. And I do think that that has a huge impact on the continuation of whatever language you have picked in year 8 to GCSE and A-level. Similar to what Ian said, we're very fortunate to have language assistants in our 3 languages. And the motto of St Paul's is quality education for all, and we allow all our students to study languages. We even have good relationships with our Learning Support Centre. Our Irish assistant is also a classroom assistant in Learning Support, and he has taken a few of the students through the Couple of Focal Award. We have a Spanish teacher that goes between the Learning Support and Spanish department as well, so that languages are available to every single student within our school. As Ian mentioned in the report, we're very fortunate to be one of the post-primary secondary schools that have about 3 to 4 hours of languages at Key Stage 3, and I think that's in our favour as well. And the fact that all our languages teachers solely teach their language or a second language, they're not involved in any other subjects, are all language specialists. I think all those wee things all impact on the experiences that the students have and make them more likely to select a language at GCSE and A-level.
Thank you, Ciara. And certainly this idea of taking, for example, the 3 languages to start with and being able to sample them. We're hearing that coming through from more and more schools and allowing the pupils to try a language out before they make their selection. Could I just ask Lucy, if you were given the opportunity to change something, Lucy, about the curriculum, that what you're studying in terms of languages, to change something about it, to make it more appealing to pupils like yourself. If you could give me one thing you would change, what would you change?
I think more oral exercises would be useful. Also, whiteboard activities. They're very inclusive to each individual pupil, and although they make the lesson more focused on each pupil, they're more enjoyable for everyone. And I think they would be a very good idea.
Thank you, Lucy. And Jude, just one for you, if you don't mind. You're a pupil, obviously, at secondary level. What do you think about the idea of learning languages in primary school? I don't know whether you had the chance to do that or not, but do you think it's important?
Yeah, I do think languages in primary school is important. I went to an Irish primary school, one school in Castlewellan, and it was completely through Irish, and I feel it was very useful because we had the opportunities to learn these skills, to learn other languages like Spanish in high school now, and it's much easier for us. Also, I'm only in second year and I've already got my GCSE Irish done, and that's purely because I did languages in primary school as well. So I think having that for lots of different pupils would be very helpful.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed, Jude. So we've some questions coming through then from the audience. So if you don't mind, panel, I'm going to fire some of these at you. The first one then, for Kira. Would you say, Kira, that the decision to omit the spoken aspect of GCSE and A-level could have an impact on pupils' desire to continue with language study, both in school and perhaps on to further or higher education? So not just the importance of the skill, but whether that might affect uptake.
Yes, I think it will have a major impact. If you look at our students that are going into year 14 in September, they had no oral in year 12, they had no official oral in year 13, and now will not have an oral in year 14. To move on to third level education in a language, you need to have confidence in the spoken language, and I worry that that will have an impact. I also feel that speaking a language can be the best part of learning a language as well, and when students don't have that experience at GCSE, again, they won't have the confidence to go on to A-level where they know there will be more focus on spoken word. So I would worry that that would all impact on the confidence levels of our students.
Thanks, thank you. And Kevin, and this is a question that picks up on something that you mentioned yourself. What would be your views on the inclusion and importance of sign language on the curriculum alongside other languages?
I think it would actually be very important. For example, we have a wee boy in our school who uses Microton, and his classmates actually are using Microton to communicate with him. You know, I think if we want to be truly inclusive schools, if we want to be a truly inclusive education sector, we need to be able to communicate with everyone. You know, even if it's just to say hello. And as Kira was saying, you know, it is about taster. It is about learning even a couple of words so that you're actually able to say hello, how are you, to make someone feel comfortable. And again, I think it's a huge sector of our society that we've actually ignored. You know, that we actually haven't. We talk about learning languages, Irish, Polish, French, German, but we have a whole sector of people in our own community who use sign language, and I think we have to look and possibly start doing a little bit of sign language to make them feel included.
That's great, thank you. And maybe one for Lucy, if you wouldn't mind, Lucy. How important have you found the international connections in your school? So, for example, having a language assistant, and we've talked a little bit today already about language assistants. If you've had a native speaker of any of the languages you're learning, or any international, maybe a visit abroad, has that been important for you?
Well, here in Banbridge Academy, we have a foreign exchange programme, and English is the most well-spoken language throughout the world. Therefore, if we were to visit a foreign country, such as France, we would be able to help the students understand English more, and also us to have a feel of what it would be like in a French school. Great,
great. One for Ian, if you don't mind, as author of the report. So the findings for primary schools certainly seem to be suggesting that the opportunity for all pupils to learn language would be very welcome. Would you agree that it's time now to develop the statutory curriculum in Northern Ireland in order to facilitate this at primary level?
Yes, without doubt, the time is now that we need to be rebuilding the primary curriculum to include a language, and we can't be having this conversation in another 2 years that we need primary languages. We need action now. It's very unfortunate that the primary modern language programme, which did offer language teaching in some, and I stress some, primary schools, not all, and focused on Irish, Spanish, and to a small extent Polish. It neglected French and German, but it was better to have it than not to have it. I think that we should have been building strategically on that, and it is unforgivable that the funding for that was pulled on the 31st of March 2015. In building up primary languages, I'm the first person to say, yes, we do need to have them, but if we are going to have them, we need to do this properly, and we need to look at what the learning outcomes are. And we want these young people to be able to make progress in the language. It's not about the jolly or the bolt-on. Of course, we want their lessons to be fun, but we also want them to make real progress on what they're learning. And we now are in a privileged position to know from very robust research that has been done by Suzanne Graham and her colleagues at Reading University that for children to make progress in primary languages, they need to have 1 hour of contact time per week, and they need to be taught by a teacher who has degree level proficiency in the language. So there's a funding issue here that money needs to be made available to implement this. We do have the manpower to deliver it, but there will need to be a concerted effort to make sure that this can effectively be rolled out in all schools in Northern Ireland. But to come back to the original question, yes, the time is now, and as I've said on many occasions, Northern Ireland is completely out of kilter with the rest of the UK, Ireland, and indeed the landmass of Europe, in that we don't have primary languages. And it's time that our politicians and our officials at Department of Education explain why we don't have primary languages.
So very, very clear view that we need primary languages, but we also need to think through the detail of it, especially around issues like contact time, which really matter in terms of the results. And staying with primary, if I could go back to Kevin, there's a very interesting question, a very important question has come in, which is, can you say a little bit more about how languages are brought into your international school links? So in other words, we often hear about international links in schools, but languages don't always form part of that. And obviously your school is very much leading the way in this sort of activity. Can you say how you bring languages into those international exchanges?
Well, for example, whenever we actually had our visitors from Italy over, we have actually a couple of Italian children here in school. So, they were able then to go and host our Italian visitors and talk to them in Italian. Again, because we had been learning Spanish, and I know Ian had talked about French and German. Spanish was a language I learned at school and loved the teacher, and I think that's an important thing. If you love your teacher who's teaching you the language, you'll love the language. And because we had been learning Spanish, a lot of our children were able to converse with their Spanish visitors as well in the language. And again, we would have quite a sizable Polish community, and because we had our links with a Polish school, our Polish children were able to actually take them around the school and converse with them in Polish and talk to us, talk to them about what life was like in St. Ronan's. So again, our children were also learning from each other, and they were learning different greetings in the different languages to actually welcome our visitors, and learning actually every class, every year group took a different country of visitors, and actually learned a little bit about the country as well and the traditions. And it wasn't just the fact of the language, we were learning a lot more than just the spoken word. We were learning about the whole culture, the whole background, and how the country actually came into existence. And it was something that really thrilled our children, and it was a real celebratory week whenever we were hosting.
Excellent. Great. In other words, the language and the culture are completely integrated in what you're doing in those kinds of international links and exchanges. And one for Jude, if that's okay. Obviously you've a group of friends at school. Some of them are selecting languages and some of them are not selecting languages. Why do you think some of some of your friends would decide not to take a language at GCSE?
I feel like a lot of my friends might think that it's just a lot of work to take a language, or that possibly that they find it very difficult. And I think, in my opinion, for GCSE, a way to do it would to be, like at the minute, for me in second year, or for everyone in second year learning languages, for the teacher to give us creative and fun ways to help us remember our language and like vocabulary.
Great, great. Can I just ask each of you, for 5 of you, just one takeaway, closing comment, if you like, one thing that you would like the audience to take away in terms of your message about language learning, just literally one sentence, one small takeaway. Maybe start with Ciara.
Oh gosh, Janice, no pressure at all. I actually, although as a post-primary teacher, I think primary schools are the key. The reinstatement of a primary language programme. I know it's a bit longer than one statement, but if we see that students have attended summer camps where languages were available, we see a big impact on that in Year 8 Irish and their confidence and love of the language. So a primary languages programme, I think, would have a big impact.
Top priority for you. Great, thank you. Kevin?
I would say lobby the politicians and to make sure that we actually get a proper modern foreign language programme in primary schools, and one that's properly funded.
So primary schools getting a good push there from both Ciara and Kevin. Very good. Lucy?
Perhaps for young children, maybe to watch a television programme in a foreign language, because that's how young children learn things these days.
So just at home, to other young people, same age as yourself, just spend a little bit of time watching a programme in a language other than English at home. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Jude, what about you?
Just that being bilingual has changed my life, and that I've been given so many opportunities just like this today.
Well, that's quite a message. That's a great message, isn't it? Being bilingual has changed your life. That's the sort of message we like to hear. That's fantastic. Can you pin down what it is, Jude? It's allowed you to come to events like this. What other ways has it changed your life?
It's given me a lot of like communication skills and being able to learn so many new things, because I've learned second language at such a young age.
Very good. So it's helped your all-round your communication skills and your ability to mix with other people and so forth. That's great. And Ian, as the author of the report, what would you say? What would be your main comments? I'll even give you time for more than one takeaway. What would be your main messages then as we start to move towards closing today?
From my research, the teachers in Northern Ireland are doing an outstanding job and working very hard to deliver what the Department of Education are asking them to deliver for Key Stage 3 modern languages, and for what CCA are asking them to deliver for GCSE and A-level languages. The teachers can't do any more. The power lies with the Department of Education and with CCEA to change what needs to be taught in our schools and what needs to be assessed and how it needs to be assessed in our schools. So the power is fully in the hands of the examination body, the awarding body, and the Department of Education. And if they can craft a curriculum and an examination that will appeal to young people, then the teachers will very happily and very competently deliver it.
And can I ask you, Ian, just since you've raised the question and you raised it in your presentation as well about curriculum, in a nutshell, I know these things are detailed and you know we don't have time to talk about the detail, but in a nutshell, what is it? What's the core thing that needs to change in the GCSE curriculum, in your opinion? Because as you mentioned, there are major changes ahead in England. Mm-hmm. They've not necessarily been, what's been proposed is not necessarily popular. What would you do if you were given a blank sheet for the Northern Ireland curriculum?
First of all, I would ask young people what they want to be learning at GCSE in languages. I don't think any of them will come and tell you it's about household chores and the environment and their part-time salary job, most of whom don't actually have a part-time salary job. So we need to look at the content of what pupils are learning at GCSE and ask the pupils what they want to learn, and then ask them how they want to be assessed. And if we give our pupils that voice, they will come up with very good answers. I would imagine answers would be along the lines of jettison the old-fashioned listening examination, jettison the interrogation by speaking examination, of course retain speaking as an assessment, but not in its current format of role plays and conversation. And look at what's going on in other European nations, not with regards to how they're learning English, but to how children in Germany are learning French and Spanish, how children in Spain are learning French, for example, and see what can we do to improve our mode of assessment and the content of what our young people are learning. And if we get the GCSE right, then that will naturally flow down into Key Stage 3.
Lovely, thank you very much. That's a very positive note on which to end. Can I just thank all our panelists again, thank Ian for the report and for the British Council for funding and facilitating it. Thanks to our panelists, thanks to our audience, thank you for the questions, which were excellent. We hope that you've enjoyed the event. It would be great if we could carry on the conversation on social media after we've all turned off our computers. And maybe you could feed through some questions that we didn't get a chance to take today. Again, just use the hashtag language trends NI. In the next couple of days, the British Council is going to send you out a feedback form. We'd really love to have your views on the event. It helps us to plan events in the future. And there'll also be a recording of today's event, which will be on the British Council website in the next few days, so you can go in again and have a listen again to the discussion. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today, and have a lovely evening. Thank you.